Fort Branson sat in the heart of Texas like a self-contained world, a place of order, steel, and discipline, where the sun baked the runways and the air hummed with drills. Soldiers came and went in perfect rhythm, boots striking pavement in unison, rifles gleaming under the afternoon light. To an outsider, it looked like any other American military base. But inside those gates, every man and woman carried a different story, some written in pride, others in scars. Among them was Sergeant Lena Marshall, a 34-year-old logistics officer with an unshakable calm that others mistook for coldness. She was tall, graceful, her movements efficient and precise. People often said she could quiet a room without raising her voice. Even in the chaos of command briefings, Lena had that rare ability to make others listen, not because she demanded it, but because she radiated control. She'd been stationed at Fort Branson for almost 4 years, managing supply routes, rations, and the daily stream of orders that kept the base alive. Her subordinates admired her dedication. Her superiors trusted her judgment. Yet few really knew her. Lena didn't talk much about herself, about the small Kansas town she'd left behind, or the childhood she'd buried deep under layers of uniform and duty. That Wednesday afternoon had been long and draining. The quartermaster's office was hot and stuffy, filled with the smell of coffee and paperwork. Lena rubbed her temples as she reviewed supply requests for the week, ammo inventories, food shipments, maintenance parts. It was all routine, nothing unusual. At 3 p.m., she finally leaned back in her chair and exhaled. 5 minutes, she muttered. Just 5 minutes of quiet. Her assistant, Corporal Reyes, chuckled from across the room. "Ma'am, if you're heading to the break room, grab me something sweet. I need a sugar miracle." Lena smiled faintly. "If there's anything left in that machine, you're in luck." She grabbed her wallet and stepped into the hallway. The afternoon light poured through the narrow windows, cutting gold stripes across the gray floors. The sound of distant gunfire echoed from the training range. Routine, predictable, safe. The base break room sat near the end of the east corridor, a small, simple space with humming fluorescent lights, a coffee maker that had seen better days, and a vending machine that everyone swore was haunted. Soldiers joked that it ate more quarters than it gave snacks. When Lena entered, the room was empty, except for 2 privates sitting by the window, talking quietly. She nodded at them, walked to the vending machine, and peered through the glass. Only one snack bar remained, a granola bar, the kind she liked, chocolate chip and oats. She pressed the button, heard the metallic clunk, and bent down to grab it. The door opened behind her. She didn't turn immediately. She'd grown used to the noise of boots coming and going. But the sudden silence that followed made her glance up. Private Darnell Brooks stood in the doorway. He was young, barely 20, with a lean build, close-cropped hair, and restless eyes that darted around like he was searching for something invisible. Lena recognized him. He'd been in trouble twice this month already for insubordination and lateness. The kind of soldier who burned bright, but burned out fast. "Afternoon, Private," she greeted, her tone professional, but not cold. He didn't answer. His eyes flicked toward the vending machine. "That was the last one," she said, holding up the granola bar. "Sorry." Still no response. Lena studied him more closely. His uniform was rumpled, his jaw tense. His hands twitched as if his nerves were frayed. Something about his expression, half anger, half despair, made her uneasy. "You all right?" she asked, softer now. He blinked, then stepped closer. "Ma'am, I haven't eaten since morning. You missed chow? They ran out." His voice cracked slightly. "They ran out before my unit got through. I've been working all damn day on the vehicles." And he stopped himself. Lena nodded slowly, sympathetic. "That's rough. Supply's been late all week. Here, she held out the snack bar. Take it. He looked at her hand, then at her face, and shook his head. You sure? Go on. For a moment, it seemed fine. Just another tired soldier having a bad day. But when he reached for the bar, something flickered across his face. Frustration, shame, maybe both. And then, almost too fast to process, he snapped. You think this fixes anything? He hissed. Lena froze. Excuse me? He took a step back and reached into his waistband. Her stomach turned cold. Darnell. He pulled out his sidearm, the military-issued M9, and pointed it straight at her forehead. The world shrank to silence. The two privates by the window froze, wide-eyed, one halfway out of his chair. A paper cup fell to the floor and rolled. The humming of the vending machine became the only sound in the room. Lena's mind didn't race. It slowed. Years of training, of discipline, of childhood memories she never wanted to remember, all fused into a single steady heartbeat. Put it down, she said quietly. Don't tell me what to do. His voice cracked like a whip, full of panic and anger. You don't understand what it's like. You sit behind your desk while we starve out there. Lena kept her gaze locked on his. Then tell me what it's like. Help me understand. He flinched, the gun trembling in his hand. Shut up. Her instinct screamed to duck, to call for help, but she didn't move. Any sudden motion could trigger him. Instead, she took a slow breath, her voice soft but unwavering. You're not angry at me, Darnell, she said. You're angry at something else. The system, the stress. I get it. But this, she nodded toward the weapon, isn't going to fix it. A tear slid down his cheek, surprising even him. From the hallway came a shout. Base security. Drop your weapon. Darnell spun toward the door, panic flooding his face. Don't come in here. Lena snapped, loud and sharp enough to freeze the guards outside. He's scared, not violent. The privates inside stared at her, terrified. No one breathed. Lena turned back to Darnell. Look at me, she whispered. Not them. Just me. His hand shook harder. I didn't mean to. I wanted something to eat. I know. Everything's messed up, Sergeant. I'm tired. I just wanted one good day. Her voice softened to a near whisper. Then let's make this one. A long, heavy silence followed. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, slowly, his arm began to drop. The gun clattered onto the tile. Before the guards could rush in, Lena stepped forward, kicked the weapon away gently, and placed a steady hand on his shoulder. It's over, Private. He sank to his knees, sobbing. The two privates exhaled loudly, one whispering, "Holy hell." Security flooded in moments later, shouting orders, restraining Darnell, checking Lena for injuries. She said nothing, only watched him as they led him away. A boy, not a monster, swallowed by his own despair. Someone handed her a chair. She didn't sit. Instead, she looked down at the snack bar still clutched in her hand. Slightly crushed now, its wrapper bent. In the chaos, she realized something strange. She wasn't shaking, not even a little. That night, as reports were, filed and whispers spread across the base, soldiers would replay the scene in disbelief. They'd talk about the calm, unflinching sergeant who stood in front of a loaded gun and didn't blink. They would call it courage, but to Lena Marshall, it didn't feel like courage at all. It felt like a memory repeating itself, one she thought she'd buried long ago. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning. The silence after the gun dropped was deafening. Even after Darnell Brooks had been escorted out, handcuffed and trembling, the air in the break room still vibrated with tension, like sound waves that refused to die. Sergeant Lena Marshall stood in the middle of it all, the crushed granola bar still in her hand. The fluorescent lights flickered once, buzzing like angry insects before settling back into their steady hum. "Ma'am, are you okay?" one of the privates finally whispered. His voice sounded small, unsure. Lena turned her head slightly, her expression unreadable. "I'm fine," she said, her tone too calm to be convincing. Her voice had that flat steadiness that only soldiers under pressure could muster, the kind that didn't break until long after the danger had passed. The security chief, Captain Herrera, barged in seconds later, face red with fury and fear. What the hell happened here? The privates talked over each other, stumbling through their version of events, the shouting, the gun, Lena's calm voice. Herrera's gaze darted between them before locking onto Lena. "You should have called for backup sooner, Sergeant." "What were you thinking standing in front of an armed man?" "I was thinking if I moved too fast, he'd pull the trigger," Lena replied quietly. Herrera's jaw tightened. He wanted to yell, to reprimand her for breaking protocol, but something in her voice stopped him. He exhaled and rubbed his temples. "He's in custody now. We'll get statements from everyone." Lena nodded. "Understood." When she finally left the room, the base had already erupted in whispers. News traveled faster than bullets on Fort Branson. By dinner hour, every mess table buzzed with the same story, retold with added drama. How Private Brooks lost control, how Sergeant Marshall stared down a gun, how she didn't even blink. Some said she was crazy. Others said she was the bravest woman on base. By nightfall, the entire compound seemed restless. Even those who hadn't been there spoke about it like witnesses. In her quarters, Lena sat on the edge of her bed, still in uniform. Her boots were off, her hair loosened from its tight bun. The granola bar sat on the desk, unopened, untouched. She stared at it. It seemed ridiculous, almost absurd, that something so small, so ordinary, had triggered all of this. $1 snack had nearly become a headline. Sergeant shot over granola bar. But it wasn't about the snack. She knew that. It was about something deeper, something breaking inside a young soldier no one had noticed. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in." Corporal Reyes entered, holding a file. His face carried the kind of mix between concern and curiosity only trusted subordinates dared show. "They're running the report, ma'am," he said. "Brooks is in medical evaluation. MPs say he didn't resist. He just cried." Lena nodded. "Good." Reyes hesitated, then asked, "Were you scared?" The question caught her off guard, not because of its boldness, but because she didn't know the answer. She looked at him for a moment, then said softly, "No, not really. I've seen worse things pointed at me than a gun." Reyes frowned slightly, but didn't press further. "They want you in command office tomorrow morning for a debrief." "Of course." He turned to leave, but paused at the door. "Ma'am, everyone's talking about you. Some say you saved his life. Others say you risked yours for nothing." Lena smiled faintly, though her eyes stayed distant. Maybe both are true. After he left, she lay back on her bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Darnell's trembling hands, the fear in his voice, the confusion in his eyes. She replayed it over and over. What if she'd said the wrong thing? What if he'd flinched? What if? Her chest tightened. She pressed her palm against her sternum and forced herself to breathe evenly. "Control," she whispered. "Always control." Outside her window, the bass quieted down, but in her head, the scene refused to fade. The next morning, the sun rose sharp and golden over Fort Branson, but it felt like a different place. News had spread beyond the base. A reporter from a local news station had already parked near the gates, trying to get a statement. In the command conference room, Lena sat before a panel: Captain Herrera, Colonel Winslow, and a civilian psychologist, Dr. June Albright. The colonel's voice was steady, but cold. "Sergeant Marshall, walk us through the events once again, from your perspective." Lena did. Her recounting was methodical, emotionless, like reading from a checklist, the vending machine. The confrontation, the weapon, the surrender. Dr. Albright watched her closely, tapping a pen against her clipboard. "And during the incident, did you experience any fear, anxiety, or physical reactions? Shaking, dizziness, loss of focus?" Lena shook her head. "No, ma'am, none at all." "No." The psychologist leaned forward slightly. "That's unusual, Sergeant. Most people confronted with a firearm at close range experience acute stress, elevated pulse, sweating, sometimes even memory blackouts." Lena's eyes flickered briefly. "With respect, ma'am, I've been under fire before." "Fear doesn't help you think," the colonel interjected. "Your actions prevented a possible shooting. But you also broke protocol by engaging with the suspect instead of calling for backup immediately. I believed a tactical response would escalate the situation, sir." He leaned back, studying her. "Maybe, or maybe you got lucky. Either way, command's ordering a psychological evaluation. You'll cooperate fully." "Yes, sir." Dismissed. As she left, she could feel their eyes following her, admiration mixed with unease. People didn't know what to make of someone who faced a gun and stayed calm. To them, she was either extraordinary or broken. By midday, the base cafeteria was buzzing again. Soldiers glanced at her as she passed, whispers trailing in her wake. "That's her, right? The one who didn't flinch?" She stared down Brooks like it was nothing. "She's either fearless or crazy." Lena ignored them, grabbed a coffee, and sat alone by the window. Outside, the Texas sun scorched the tarmac, soldiers moving like ants across the training field. Across the cafeteria, two officers debated loudly. "He pulled a gun over a damn snack," one said. "What kind of soldier does that?" "The kind that's falling apart," the other replied quietly. Lena's eyes flicked toward them. She wanted to speak, to tell them he wasn't evil, just hungry in more ways than one, but she stayed silent. Words like that would sound naive here. Compassion wasn't in the manual. That night, she returned to her quarters and finally opened the granola bar. She took one small bite, chewing slowly, lost in thought. The sweetness felt strange on her tongue. She closed her eyes, and suddenly, the room around her vanished. She was no longer in Texas. She was back in Kansas, 12 years old, hiding behind a door while her father shouted at her mother, demanding dinner that wasn't ready. The sound of breaking glass. The slam of a fist. A gunshot that didn't kill anyone, but still destroyed everything. Her heart clenched. That was why she didn't flinch yesterday. It wasn't bravery. It was muscle memory, the kind carved into her bones long ago. She opened her eyes again, breathing shakily. On her knitstand sat a photo, her younger self, smiling in uniform, on the day she enlisted. She'd joined to escape chaos, to find order, to become someone who never lost control. And yet, here she was, staring at the same kind of pain all over again. Only this time, she'd faced it down and survived. Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, rolling across the Texas plains. The storm came quickly, sheets of rain drumming against the metal roof. Lena sat by the window, watching lightning split the sky. She thought about Darnell, sitting alone somewhere in detention, probably cold, probably terrified. She wondered if anyone was talking to him, if anyone even cared to. Her jaw tightened. Something deep inside her, the part that still believed in fixing broken things, refused to let it end like this. Maybe she couldn't save her father back then, but maybe she could save someone else now. As the lightning flashed again, Lena whispered to herself, tomorrow. I'll talk to him." And with that promise, she finally felt something she hadn't since the gun pressed against her forehead: peace. Little did she know, that decision, simple and quiet as it seemed, would shock everyone on base all over again. Morning came heavy and gray over Fort Branson, as though the sky itself hadn't slept. The base ran on its usual rhythm: drills, orders, the clang of metal on metal, yet beneath the surface, tension pulsed like an unseen current. Everyone was still talking about what happened in the break room. But while others debated, Sergeant Lena Marshall couldn't stop feeling. Every second of the previous day replayed in her mind: the cold muzzle of the gun, the fear in Darnell's eyes, the sound of her own voice steadying his trembling. She'd faced danger before, but this was different. This wasn't an enemy. This was one of their own. By noon, she'd already made her decision. She walked straight into the administrative wing, where Captain Herrera was dictating orders to his staff. When he saw her, his brows drew together. "Marshal, you're supposed to be resting." "I need to see Private Brooks," she said simply. Herrera froze. "You can't be serious." "I am." "Absolutely not," he snapped. "He's under psychological observation. Command wants a full report before anyone goes near him." Lena's tone stayed calm. "Sir, with respect, I was the only one who got through to him yesterday. If you want a real assessment, let me talk to him." Herrera looked at her for a long moment, then exhaled. "You think this is smart? The man pulled a weapon on you." "He's not a man with a weapon anymore," she replied softly. "He's a soldier who made a mistake." Herrera muttered a curse under his breath. "You've got 10 minutes. I'm sending an MP in with you." Lena gave a small nod. "That's all I need." The holding cell area sat in the far corner of the base. A small, sterile building that smelled faintly of metal polish and disinfectant. The guards at the entrance stiffened when they saw Lena approach. "Sergeant Marshall," one said respectfully, "are you sure you want to do this?" She met his gaze. "Open the door." They hesitated, but obeyed. Inside, Private Darnell Brooks sat on a metal bench, wrists cuffed, eyes hollow. The moment she stepped inside, his shoulders tensed. The MP stationed near the door stood firm, hand near his holster. "It's all right," Lena said quietly. "He won't hurt anyone." Darnell looked up at her, not defiant this time, but ashamed. His voice was hoarse when he spoke. "Why are you here?" Lena took a step forward. "Because you deserve to be heard." He laughed bitterly. "Heard? You think anyone's going to listen to me after what I did?" "I am listening," she said. For a few moments, silence filled the space between them. Not the heavy silence of fear this time, but something quieter, sadder. Darnell finally said, "I don't even know why I did it. I just snapped. I hadn't eaten. I hadn't slept. I kept asking for help, but no one cared." "Did you tell your CO?" He looked away. "Tried. They said I was lazy. Said I wasn't cut out for service." His voice cracked on the last word. "They don't see what it's like down there? 20-hour shifts, no sleep, getting yelled at for breathing wrong. I just broke." Lena nodded slowly, her heart heavy. "I believe you." He stared at her, confused. "Why? You should hate me." "I could have killed you." "You didn't," she said firmly. "Because somewhere in that moment, you still chose not to." His eyes glistened, and for the first time, he didn't look like a criminal. He looked like a kid, scared, hungry, and lost. The MP near the door shifted uneasily. "Time's up, Sergeant." Lena held up a hand. "1 more minute." She crouched slightly, leveling her gaze with Darnell's. "Listen to me, Private. What you did was wrong. No one's saying otherwise. But it doesn't have to define you. You're not your worst moment. You hear me? Darnell's lips trembled. They'll discharge me. I'll be done. Maybe, she admitted. But you'll still have a life after this. And you'll have a choice, to fix what you broke, or let it break you. A tear rolled down his cheek. He nodded slowly, as if her words had found a small crack in the wall he built around himself. Thank you, he whispered. Lena gave a faint smile. Get some rest. I'll see what I can do. As she turned to leave, he called out, Sergeant, why didn't you shoot me? Lena paused, looking back. Because I saw someone who was hurting, not someone who wanted to hurt me. Then she left. Outside, the storm that had rolled in the night before still lingered, heavy clouds hanging low over the Texas plains. Lena walked across the compound, the wind tugging at her uniform. She didn't head back to her quarters. Instead, she went straight to Dr. June Albright, the base psychologist. Dr. Albright looked up from her desk, surprised. Sergeant Marshall? You're early for your evaluation. I'm not here for me, Lena said. I'm here for Private Brooks. The psychologist raised an eyebrow. You're advocating for the man who pointed a gun at your head? Yes. Dr. Albright leaned back in her chair. That's unusual. Unusual doesn't mean wrong. The older woman studied her for a long moment. You know, Sergeant, you remind me of myself 20 years ago, believing every broken person can be fixed. Lena's jaw tightened. Believing isn't the same as ignoring reality, ma'am. He's not a threat. He's starving for help. Someone needs to see that. Dr. Albright sighed. I'll note your concerns in my report. Lena nodded and turned to leave, but the doctor added softly, You should talk about yourself too, you know. Not just him. Lena hesitated. Maybe later. Later that evening, word spread that Darnell had attempted to harm himself in confinement. The MPs found him before it was too late. The news hit Lena like a punch to the gut. She sat frozen at her desk, her fingers gripping the edge of the table. She had spent the day convincing Command he wasn't dangerous, and now she realized she'd been half right. He wasn't dangerous to others. He was dangerous to himself. Without asking permission, she rushed to the infirmary. The nurse on duty stopped her at the door. You can't go in. I'm going in. Her voice left no room for argument. Inside, Darnell lay pale and weak, and forlorn in his arm. When he saw her, his lips parted in shame. I'm sorry, he whispered. Lena's throat tightened. Don't be, just stay alive. Tears welled in his eyes. I didn't mean to scare you. I just didn't know what else to do. I know, she said softly. That's why you're going to get help now. Real help. He nodded faintly, exhaustion clouding his gaze. Lena pulled up a chair and sat beside him until he drifted to sleep. Outside the infirmary, Captain Herrera was waiting. You disobeyed a direct order, he said, though his tone wasn't as harsh as before. Again. I know, Lena replied. Write me up if you have to. He looked past her at the sleeping soldier. You really think this is worth it? Yes, sir, she said quietly. Because if it were me in that bed, I'd want someone to think so too. Herrera sighed, rubbed his neck, and muttered, You're either the best damn sergeant I've got, or the biggest headache in uniform. Maybe both, she said with a tired smile. That night, the storm finally broke. The rain came hard, washing the dust and heat off the base. Lena sat in her quarters again, the sound of water against the windows like a lullaby she didn't deserve. She thought about the standoff, not the one with the gun, but the one still going on inside her. Between duty and empathy. Between order and compassion. Between the soldier she was trained to be and the human being she refused to stop being. She knew the tribunal was coming. The press had already picked up the story. The base wanted to move on, to treat it as an anomaly, a glitch in their perfect system. But Lena couldn't. She wouldn't, because she'd seen the truth behind the uniform, that even the strongest break when no one listens. And she'd made herself a silent promise. If the system wouldn't hear Darnell Brooks, then she would make them listen, even if it cost her everything. The sun rose soft and slow over Fort Branson the next morning, brushing gold light across the parade grounds and hangars. But no warmth reached Sergeant Lena Marshall's heart. She sat in the infirmary's waiting area, still in uniform, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Private Darnell Brooks was stable. That's what the nurse said. Stable, but sedated. The word felt empty. What did stable mean when someone's soul was already in pieces? Captain Herrera arrived not long after. He looked weary, his eyes shadowed from lack of sleep. "You've been here all night?" Lena nodded without looking up. He needed someone here. Herrera sighed. "Marshal, I get that you care, but you're putting yourself in a tight spot. Command's already asking questions. They don't like how much attention this is getting." "Attention?" she asked bitterly. "A soldier nearly died because no one noticed him breaking, and they're worried about attention?" Herrera lowered his voice. "You don't understand how far this can go. The investigation's turning political. The media's sniffing around. Command wants a neat report, not a hero story or a scandal." Lena looked up sharply. "Then they're going to be disappointed, sir. Because I'm not lying to protect anyone." He rubbed his temples. "You're making this harder on yourself." "Maybe," she said. "But at least I'll be able to sleep at night." Herrera didn't argue. He simply left her to her silence. Later that day, the military tribunal convened in the administrative hall, a sterile room lined with gray walls and brighter lights than anyone wanted. A few officers sat behind a long table, files neatly stacked before them. Lena stood at attention in her dress uniform, her posture perfect, even as her stomach churned. "Sergeant Marshall," began Colonel Wexler, the presiding officer, "we appreciate your cooperation during this investigation. We'll start with your account of the events." "Yes, sir." She spoke calmly, detailing every moment, from when Darnell had pressed the gun to her head to the instant she talked him down. She explained how he'd been overworked, ignored, and desperate. When she finished, the colonel adjusted his glasses. "You're aware, Sergeant, that your actions could have endangered others? You failed to follow standard response protocol." "With respect, sir," Lena said evenly, "if I had followed protocol, he'd be dead right now." A murmur rippled through the room. One of the officers leaned forward. "Are you suggesting that protocol is flawed?" "I'm suggesting," she said carefully, "that sometimes compassion saves lives where rules can't." The colonel's expression tightened. "You're out of line, Sergeant." "Maybe," she replied softly. "But I'm not wrong." Outside, word spread fast that Sergeant Marshall had stood up to the board. Some called her brave. Others called her reckless. Soldiers whispered her name in the mess hall, in the barracks, in the motor pool. To some, she was a hero. To others, she was a threat. By evening, she'd been ordered to remain on restricted duty pending further review. That night, she returned to her small, sparsely furnished room, the same one where the nightmares had begun. She sat on her bed, her mind racing. Every choice she'd made was being weighed, judged, and possibly condemned. Yet deep down, she didn't regret it. Not 1 second. Her phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. "Ma'am, this is Corporal Davis. I heard what you did for Brooks. I just wanted to say thank you." A lot of us needed to hear someone speak up. Lena stared at the screen for a long moment before replying simply, "Take care of each other, Corporal." She put the phone down and closed her eyes. For the first time in days, she felt something like hope. Meanwhile, in another corner of the base, Darnell Brooks woke up. The sterile ceiling blurred into focus above him. His throat was dry, his wrists ached, and his chest felt heavy. But there was something new inside him, a faint awareness that he was still alive. The nurse noticed him stirring and called for Dr. Albright. The psychologist entered quietly, clipboard in hand. "Good morning, Private Brooks. You gave us quite a scare." He swallowed hard. "Am I still under arrest?" "For now," she said gently. "But Sergeant Marshall has spoken to the review board on your behalf. You should know that." His eyes widened. "She did?" "Yes. She believes you deserve another chance." Tears burned in the corners of his eyes. "After everything I did?" Dr. Albright smiled faintly. "Sometimes people see what's worth saving, even when we can't." 2 days later, the weather cleared, and the base seemed to breathe again. The tribunal reconvened, this time for Brooks. Lena attended quietly, sitting in the back row as Darnell was escorted into the room. His posture shaky, but proud. He looked around until his gaze found her. She gave him a small nod, steady, reassuring. The colonel spoke first. "Private Brooks, given the gravity of your actions, you are facing discharge and potential confinement. However, we have received several testimonies concerning your mental health and working conditions." A pause. "Sergeant Marshall has also submitted a personal statement, taking partial responsibility for the failure of supervision." Darnell's head snapped up, shocked. Lena didn't flinch. The colonel continued, "Given these factors, the board has decided to approve a conditional discharge and mandatory rehabilitation. You will not be imprisoned, but you will be released from service." The room exhaled. Darnell's voice cracked as he whispered, "Thank you, sir." But his eyes were on Lena, who met his gaze with quiet pride. Outside, as the two soldiers stepped into the open air, for the first time since it all began, Darnell approached her hesitantly. "Why'd you do it?" he asked. "You didn't have to." Lena smiled faintly. "Because once upon a time, someone did it for me." He frowned. "You?" she nodded. "First year in service. Different kind of breakdown, same feeling, like the walls were closing in. My CO noticed. Helped me get through it. I promised myself I'd pay that forward." Darnell lowered his head. "I don't deserve this." "Then earn it," she said. "Live in a way that proves this wasn't for nothing." He nodded, emotion thick in his throat. "Thank you, Sergeant." "Take care of yourself, Private," she replied. "And don't disappear. You still got a story left to write." That evening, when Lena walked across the base, people turned to look at her, not with judgment this time, but quiet respect. Captain Herrera stopped her near the mess hall. "Heard about the decision," he said. "You pulled off a miracle." Lena gave a small shrug. "Not a miracle, sir. Just a reminder that we're human." He nodded slowly. "You know, command won't forget this. You challenged the system and lived to tell the tale. That's rare." She smirked. "Guess I'm not very good at keeping quiet." Herrera chuckled. "Good. Maybe it's time someone stopped pretending everything's fine." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun set behind the hangars, streaks of orange and violet painting the sky. For the first time in weeks, Lena felt at peace. Later that night, she sat outside her quarters, a notebook open on her lap. The words came easily. Not a report, not a statement, but something else entirely. She wrote about empathy in uniform, about how courage isn't always about facing bullets. Sometimes it's about facing bureaucracy, silence, and fear. At the top of the page, she wrote a single line. "The bravest thing a soldier can do is care when it's easier not to." She smiled softly and closed the notebook. The base was quiet now, just the hum of the generators and the faint whistle of wind. Somewhere inside, a young man was sleeping, alive, healing, and finally being heard. And somewhere deep down, Lena Marshall knew she had changed more than one life. Maybe even the system itself. The storm that had once drenched Fort Branson had long since cleared, leaving behind crisp air and long shadows that stretched across the compound. Yet for Sergeant Lena Marshall, the real storm was just beginning. She didn't notice it at first. When Private Darnell Brooks left the base under supervision, several soldiers had gathered to quietly salute him. There were no cheers, no applause, just a respectful silence that spoke louder than words. Lena had watched from afar, her heart heavy but proud. She thought, for a moment, that things might finally return to normal. But peace on a military base never lasts long, especially when the media gets involved. 2 days later, Lena's name appeared on national news. The headline read, "Sergeant defies protocol, talks down armed soldier, saves life." At first, it seemed positive. A few local stations even called her a hero. But within hours, new headlines followed. Military sergeant challenges chain of command, discipline or defying orders. Controversy at Fort Branson. The story spread like wildfire. Commentators debated her actions. Politicians used it as talking points. Online forums swarmed with opinions, half calling her a symbol of compassion, the other half accusing her of endangering the chain of command. Lena didn't watch the coverage. She didn't need to. She could feel the shift in the air around her, the sideways glances, the whispers that stopped when she entered the room. By the end of the week, she was summoned to headquarters. General Walton, a tall man with a stern expression and the kind of voice that could silence an entire hall, sat behind a mahogany desk. Lena stood before him, posture perfect, expression unreadable. "Sergeant Marshall," he began, "you've brought quite a bit of attention to this base." "Yes, sir." "Not all of it welcome." She stayed silent. "You're being hailed as a hero," he said, flipping through a folder. "But within these walls, people are questioning whether you understand the word discipline. You went against standing orders, defied your superior, and made statements that, with respect—" "Sir," Lena interrupted, her voice calm but firm, "I prevented a tragedy. I followed my training to protect life, not end it." Walton's gaze hardened. "You also undermined your command structure." "I spoke the truth." "The truth," he said sharply, "is not your job. Your job is to follow orders." For a moment, neither spoke. The air in the office grew thick, heavy with the clash of principle and protocol. Finally, Walton closed the folder. "You're being reassigned, effective immediately." Lena blinked. "Reassigned?" "Yes. Temporary transfer to a logistics division in California. You'll report there within 72 hours. "Sir, is this punishment?" He met her eyes. "Call it a cooling-off period. The Army doesn't like its stories written by the press before the paperwork's done." Lena clenched her jaw, but nodded. "Understood, sir. Dismissed." She left the office without a word, her boots echoing down the corridor. Outside, the air felt colder than usual. The decision didn't surprise her, but it stung nonetheless. As she passed the training field, a few soldiers paused to watch her. Some nodded respectfully. Others just looked away. She couldn't blame them. The military had a way of making people afraid to be associated with controversy, even when it came wrapped in courage. Back in her quarters, Lena began packing her duffel. Her roommate, Corporal Jenna Ruiz, watched from the doorway, frowning. "They're transferring you?" "Logistics division," Lena said quietly. "California." Jenna crossed her arms. "That's not a transfer. That's exile." Lena gave a dry laugh. "Maybe. Or maybe it's a chance to breathe." Jenna stepped forward. "You did the right thing, Lena. Everyone knows it. Right doesn't always mean safe, she said. But it's the only way I know how to live. Jenna hugged her tightly. Then don't stop. No matter where they send you. Lena didn't respond, but her grip tightened. 3 days later, she arrived at Camp Redding, a sleepy base tucked along the California desert's edge. Compared to Fort Branson, it was smaller, quieter, the kind of place soldiers went to disappear. Her new role was dull: supply coordination, paperwork, inventory management. It wasn't what she'd trained for, but it kept her busy. She spent her days signing forms and checking boxes, her nights staring at the desert horizon, missing the adrenaline, the purpose, the chaos of real command. But mostly, she missed connection. Until one afternoon, a message arrived in her inbox. Subject: You probably don't remember me. It was from Darnell Brooks. Ma'am, I wanted to thank you again. I'm in therapy now. Back home in Ohio, it's not easy, but I'm trying. They said you got transferred because of me. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to mess up your life too. For what it's worth, you saved mine. Twice. Lena read the message 3 times before replying. You don't owe me an apology, Private. You just owe yourself a chance. I'm proud of you. Keep going. For the first time in weeks, she smiled. Still, not everyone had moved on. Back in Texas, a local journalist named Karine Lowe had been digging deeper into the Fort Branson case. She'd uncovered reports of overworked personnel, delayed mental health evaluations, and ignored complaints, the very cracks that had nearly swallowed Darnell Brooks. When she reached out to Lena for comment, Lena hesitated. Speaking could mean career suicide, but silence, she realized, would mean complicity. So she answered the call. Karine's voice came through the line, crisp but kind. Sergeant Marshall, thank you for agreeing to talk. Off the record, I want to understand why you took that risk, talking down an armed soldier instead of neutralizing the threat. Lena took a breath. Because I saw a person, not a threat. Because the uniform doesn't erase what's underneath it. Fear, hunger, exhaustion. People break, Ms. Lowe. The Army teaches us to fight enemies, but sometimes the battle's inside our own walls. There was silence on the line. Then, do you want your name attached to that quote? Yes, Lena said firmly. If I'm going to stand for something, I'll do it in the open. Karine's article went live the next morning. Sergeant Marshall speaks out. The bravest thing a soldier can do is care. It went viral. Within hours, veterans across the country shared it. Mental health advocates praised her courage. Even a few retired generals wrote open letters of support. And just like that, the tide began to shift. But with support came scrutiny. Reporters camped outside Camp Redding's gates. Officials from D.C. called for further review. Some claimed she'd violated confidentiality laws. Others accused her of painting the military in a bad light. One night, as Lena sat in the mess hall, her commanding officer at Redding approached, Major Callahan, a woman with a reputation for fairness. Sergeant, she said, sliding into the seat across from her, Washington's watching you. You stirred something they can't quite contain. Should I be worried, ma'am? Callahan smiled faintly. Only if you plan on stopping. Lena raised an eyebrow. You don't disapprove? I've buried soldiers who couldn't handle the silence, Callahan said quietly. What you're doing, it matters. Just be careful. The system doesn't like being told it's broken. Lena nodded slowly. Understood. That night, she couldn't sleep. She stepped outside, the desert air cool and still, stars scattered across the endless sky. Somewhere out there, Darnell was rebuilding his life. And here she was, caught between two worlds, duty and conscience, soldier and reformer. But for the first time, she didn't feel alone. The voices rising online, the the soldiers whispering her name with pride. They reminded her that change always starts small. She looked up at the stars and murmured to herself, "Let them watch. Let them listen." And for the first time in a long while, she felt something powerful. Not fear, not defiance, but purpose. Real purpose. The night sky over Camp Redding glowed faintly with desert dust and moonlight. It was late, nearly midnight, but Sergeant Lena Marshall was still awake, sitting at her small metal desk, surrounded by papers. In front of her lay a pile of letters and emails, messages from veterans, active duty soldiers, and even family members of service members. Some thanked her. Some shared their pain. All of them said the same thing: "You gave us a voice." She'd read through dozens of them, her chest heavy but proud. But one message, in particular, made her stop cold. "My brother took his own life last year. He served at Fort Branson. Nobody listened. Thank you for being the kind of soldier he needed." Lena stared at those words for a long time, feeling a lump form in her throat. The story she had tried so hard to keep quiet, to control, had become something larger than herself. She didn't know if that was comforting or terrifying. 2 weeks later, the military's public affairs office reached out. An email arrived marked urgent, confidential. It stated that an internal panel in Washington wanted her to appear for questioning. Not disciplinary this time, but consultative. They wanted her opinion on mental health awareness and procedural reform within base operations. Lena frowned as she read it. She had expected more reprimands, not invitations. She brought the message to Major Callahan, her current commanding officer. Callahan skimmed the email and raised an eyebrow. "Looks like someone upstairs finally realized your voice can't be buried. Or they're setting a trap," Lena muttered. Callahan chuckled. "Probably both. But if you want change, Marshall, this is your moment. Just remember, they'll smile in the meeting room, can sharpen knives after." Lena nodded. "Wouldn't be the first time, ma'am." The trip to Washington, D.C. felt surreal. She hadn't been on a plane since the incident. Looking out the small oval window, she thought about Darnell, how scared he must have been in that moment, and how close everything had come to disaster. She thought about what she'd told him. "You're not your worst moment." Maybe she needed to remind herself of that, too. When she landed, a black government car met her on the tarmac. The driver said little as he took her through the quiet streets toward the Pentagon. The Capitol was clean and calm, but beneath its calmness, Lena could feel the pressure of something immense, like walking into the eye of a storm. The meeting took place in a tall glass room overlooking the city. 5 people sat at the table: generals, advisors, and 1 civilian representative from the Defense Health Agency. Sergeant Marshall, one of them, began, "Thank you for coming. Your case has generated significant public interest." Lena kept her voice measured. "Yes, sir. You've become something of a symbol," said another, an older man with thin gray hair and calculating eyes. "That can be useful if handled properly." Lena didn't like the sound of that. "I'm not here to be useful, sir. I'm here to help fix what's broken." The man's smile flickered. "Of course. We'd like you to assist in drafting a new mental health response protocol. A few talking points for an upcoming press release would also—" "With respect," Lena interrupted, "I'm not writing talking points. I'm writing truth." A few people exchanged glances. The civilian woman leaned forward. "What truth, Sergeant?" "That our soldiers are breaking down while the system keeps pretending they're fine. That we train them to fight but not to heal. That command structures punish emotion instead of understanding it." Silence filled the room. The gray-haired general finally spoke. "That's not the message we want to send to the public." "It's the message they need to hear," Lena said quietly. The woman from the Defense Health Agency studied her, then nodded slightly, an unspoken show of support. After an hour of back and forth, the meeting ended with polite handshakes and forced smiles. As Lena walked out, one of the aides whispered to her under his breath, "Keep saying it. Some of us are listening." By the time she returned to Camp Redding, things had changed. The article about her meeting spread quickly, not through official channels, but through whispers. Soldiers started calling her the Voice. Her inbox overflowed again, but this time, not everyone was friendly. Some messages accused her of betraying her oath. Others threatened her. "You're making us look weak. Stay in your lane, Sergeant. You talk too much for someone still wearing the uniform." Lena tried to brush them off, but they got under her skin. She'd spent years following the rules, serving, protecting, obeying, and now the very people she defended were turning against her. One night, she found herself standing alone outside the barracks, staring up at the stars again. The desert was quiet except for the faint hum of generators. Second thoughts? A voice said behind her. It was Major Callahan. Lena gave a faint smile. Every day. Callahan walked up beside her, hands in her pockets. "You're shaking the walls, Marshal. You think walls fall quietly?" Lena didn't answer. Callahan looked at her for a long moment. "When you stand for something that matters, they'll test you to see if you'll break before they do. Don't let them win." That night, Lena wrote down a line in her notebook. If the system hates the mirror, maybe it's time to ask what it's reflecting. The next morning, something unexpected happened. A group of soldiers approached her at breakfast, men and women from different units, all carrying serious expressions. One of them, Corporal Davis, spoke first. "Ma'am, we heard about what you said in D.C. A bunch of us have been talking. We want to start something here. Support meetings, peer counseling, maybe even a resource group." Lena blinked. "You want to do that here?" "Yes, ma'am. Quietly, if we have to. We just need someone to back us." Lena felt her throat tighten. For the first time since the chaos began, she realized she wasn't alone in this fight. "Then you've got me," she said. Within weeks, the meetings began, small at first, just a handful of soldiers gathering after hours in the recreation hall. They talked about exhaustion, loss, trauma. Some cried, some didn't, but they all listened. And every time one of them thanked her afterward, Lena would shake her head and say, "Don't thank me. Thank yourselves for showing up." Word spread. More soldiers joined. Even a few officers stopped by to observe, only to end up staying for the whole session. Change was starting, quietly, beneath the radar, but it was real. Then came the night of the inspection order. Lena was in her office when she got the email, direct from Central Command. Effective immediately. Unauthorized group meetings are to cease pending review. All off-duty gatherings require formal approval. She felt her stomach drop. Moments later, Callahan burst through the door, holding her own copy of the same email. "They're cracking down," she said grimly. Someone tattled. Lena exhaled. "I should have known it wouldn't last." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "You're not quitting, are you?" Lena straightened her shoulders. "No, ma'am. I'm just getting started." 2 days later, she wrote another statement. Not for the press, not for command, but for her peers. She pinned it on the bulletin board outside the mess hall, where everyone could see it. It read, "They can shut down our meetings. They can silence our words. But they can't make us stop caring. This isn't rebellion. It's responsibility. Take care of each other, even when the rules forget how." Sergeant L. Marshall. By noon, copies had spread across the base. Soldiers whispered her words like a mantra. Some called it insubordination. Others called it truth. That evening, Major Callahan found her sitting outside again, under the wide desert sky. "You've started something you can't undo," Callahan said softly. "I know," Lena replied. "And maybe that's the point." Far away, in a quiet hospital in Ohio, Darnell Brooks read about her in the paper. He smiled faintly, closed the article, and whispered, "She's still fighting." Then he stood up, grabbed his journal, and began writing not about guilt, not about pain, but about hope. And in that moment, though she didn't know it, Lena Marshall had lit a fire that was spreading farther than anyone could control. A fire made not of anger, but of courage, the kind that burns quietly, persistently, until it changes everything it touches. Fort Reading had never been quieter. Yet beneath the calm, tension simmered like molten metal waiting to explode. Sergeant Lena Marshall walked across the base, her boots crunching against the gravel, her eyes scanning soldiers who moved quickly but avoided her gaze. Some nodded in respect, others whispered, and a few glared, a mix of admiration and resentment swirling in the air. It had been weeks since her public statements, her meetings, her notes pinned on bulletin boards. The movement she had sparked quietly spread, soldiers sharing concerns, starting peer support, reaching out to the wounded in ways official channels had ignored. But change made enemies as easily as allies. The email came first. "Cease and desist all unsanctioned activities immediately. Further violation will result in formal charges." Lena read it and folded it calmly, then looked up at the sky. Desert winds swept across the base, carrying the faint scent of dust and metal. She could feel eyes on her from all directions. Later that day, Major Callahan approached, expression serious. "They're not bluffing," she said. "Command is ready to discipline anyone participating in your meetings." Lena didn't flinch. "Then we'll meet where they can't stop us." Callahan's eyebrows shot up. "Outdoors? On base property?" "No," Lena said firmly. "Somewhere safe. Somewhere they can't sense her concern." Callahan studied her for a long moment. Finally, she nodded. "I'm with you. But be careful, Lena. This isn't just defiance. It's a direct challenge." That evening, Lena gathered the soldiers who had been quietly participating in the peer support meetings. They met in a small, secluded grove near the edge of the base, a place soldiers called the Hollow. They sat in a circle beneath towering pines, the air heavy with the scent of resin and dust. "You all showed up when it mattered," Lena said. "Now, you need to continue showing up for yourselves and each other. Command might not approve, but we're doing this because no one else is listening." Private Davis, the unofficial leader among the younger soldiers, spoke next. "Ma'am, some of us are scared. They could discharge us. Or worse. But we trust you." Lena's eyes softened. "I know. And you should be scared? Fear is normal. But courage isn't absence of fear. It's choosing to act anyway. And right now, acting means taking care of each other." The group nodded solemnly. News traveled fast. By morning, the whispers of the Hollow reached the ears of base officials. The next day, Lena was summoned to the command office, a place she'd once walked with pride, now filled with expectation and judgment. Colonel Riggins, a stern man with eyes like chipped stone, waited behind his desk. "Sergeant Marshall," he said, voice flat, "do you realize the extent of what you've started?" "I do, sir," Lena replied, "and I accept responsibility for it." Riggins leaned forward. "Accept responsibility? You're undermining authority, disrupting base operations, and encouraging insubordination. This is serious." "I disagree, sir," she said evenly. "I am fostering resilience. I am saving lives." The colonel slammed his fist on the desk. "You think heroism excuses disobedience?" "I think an action can kill," she said. Her eyes met his, unwavering. "Yesterday, Today, tomorrow, soldiers are suffering. They need support. Rules didn't protect Private Brooks. I did. A tense silence followed. The tribunal convened that afternoon. Soldiers and officers packed the room. Cameras weren't allowed, but the stories spread faster than ever through text messages and whispers. Lena stood before the panel, her chin lifted, her voice steady. "I will not apologize for saving a life," she said. "I will not apologize for speaking the truth. And I will not apologize for refusing to watch our soldiers break without help." One officer sneered. "And you expect the army to bend for your conscience?" "No," Lena replied. "I expect the army to live up to the values it claims to uphold. Protect life, support each other, act with honor, even when it's uncomfortable." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Outside, soldiers began gathering silently, drawn by the courage they had witnessed. They stood at attention, not in uniform, but with purpose, their presence sending a clear signal. They supported her. Private Brooks, now part of a veterans outreach program, was there too. Quietly, firmly, his presence a reminder of what was at stake. The tribunal hesitated. Cameras flashed outside as reporters and military correspondents documented the gathering. Public attention turned from criticism to admiration. Even the higher-ups could no longer ignore the ripple effect Lena had created. Inside the room, Colonel Riggins leaned back, rubbing his temples. "This isn't how it's supposed to work," he muttered. Lena met his gaze. "Maybe that's because it's not supposed to feel human. But it is human. Soldiers are people first, weapons second." A general on the panel, silent until now, finally spoke. "Marshal, your actions, though controversial, have prevented further harm. And public sentiment is overwhelmingly on your side. Command cannot proceed without risking backlash." Lena exhaled quietly, tension easing slightly. Victory was close, but not complete. The final decision came quietly, surprisingly, the next day. Sergeant Lena Marshall would remain at Camp Redding under supervision. Yes, but she would lead the mental health initiative she had created. The official statement framed it as enhancing soldier resilience programs. No reprimand. No transfer. Just recognition of what she had done and a mandate to continue, officially this time. The room erupted in quiet applause. Soldiers who had feared for her career now saw hope. That night, Lena walked through the hollow once more. Soldiers followed her, some speaking softly, others just walking in silence. "I didn't think it would come this far," Davis admitted. "We were just trying to help each other." "Sometimes," Lena said softly, "helping each other is the only thing that matters. The rest, rules, threats, politics, is just noise." A gentle wind swept across the clearing, rustling pine needles and carrying faint echoes of the desert beyond. Lena looked up at the stars. Somewhere, Darnell Brooks was sleeping peacefully, living proof that one act of courage could ripple into countless lives. She whispered to herself, "We've just begun." The story of Sergeant Marshall spread across bases nationwide. Soldiers shared it quietly, at first, then openly. Forums, newsletters, internal briefings all mentioned her courage and advocacy. Even senior officials could no longer pretend it was an isolated event. And as she walked through the camp in the early morning light, Lena realized something profound. She had become more than a sergeant. She had become a symbol, not of rebellion, not of defiance, but of courage. Courage to speak truth, to act with empathy, and to fight for what's right, even when the system itself seemed to resist it. In that moment, she understood the power of her own conviction. No matter the backlash, no matter the scrutiny, no matter the obstacles ahead, she would continue. Because lives were at stake. Because soldiers deserved to be heard. Because someone had finally listened. And she would not stop. The sun rose over Camp Redding, with a clarity Lena hadn't felt in months. Golden light spilled across the barracks, the training fields, and the desert horizon, washing everything in warmth and possibility. For the first time in weeks, Sergeant Lena Marshall felt a sense of calm, a steady, quiet confidence that no storm could shake. She had survived the threat, the investigation, the media storm, and the scrutiny of command. And now, she had a purpose recognized not just by her peers, but officially within the structure of the Army. Her mornings began with meetings for the Mental Health Initiative, officially sanctioned now, with resources and officers assigned to assist. She worked with counselors, psychologists, and even soldiers who had once been hesitant to speak up. The sessions were no longer underground. They were sanctioned, visible, and respected. Soldiers no longer feared participation. They sought it. One afternoon, Lena received a video message from Darnell Brooks. He appeared on the small screen, looking stronger, healthier, and more determined than she had ever seen him. "Ma'am," he began, voice steady, "I wanted you to see what your actions created. I finished my therapy program. I've joined a veteran support group, and I'm applying to be a counselor myself." Lena's chest tightened. "That's incredible, Darnell. I'm proud of you. Proud of us," he said. "We all got a second chance because someone cared. Because you cared." She smiled, blinking back tears. "Keep going, and help others the way you were helped. That's the real victory." Darnell nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I will, ma'am. I promise." The video ended, leaving Lena with a profound sense of accomplishment. One life saved, and one life changed. But the ripple of her actions went far beyond Darnell. Back on base, word of her initiative reached beyond Camp Redding. Senior officials across the Army requested her advice, asking for input on policy changes regarding mental health, crisis intervention, and peer support programs. Emails arrived from soldiers, veterans, and families nationwide. Some shared stories of near tragedy. Others thanked her for inspiring conversations that were long overdue. One message from a retired colonel stood out. "Sergeant Marshall, in all my years, I've never seen such courage. Not on the battlefield, but here, in facing our own failures. You've reminded the Army what it means to truly lead." Lena read the note twice, feeling a quiet pride. The system, she realized, could be changed. Slowly, painfully, but it could be changed. And she had lit the first sparks. The story of the incident that had thrust her into the public eye, the gun pressed to her head, the tense negotiation, the life she saved, became part of military training. New recruits learned about empathy, mental health, and crisis response alongside combat strategy. They studied Lena's actions as a case study, courage under pressure, innovation in crisis, and the importance of seeing soldiers as people first. She walked through a training hall one morning and overheard two new recruits discussing the story. "Did she really do all that?" one asked. "Yeah," the other replied. "And she got her unit to care about people, not just orders." Lena smiled quietly to herself. Change wasn't always loud. Sometimes it whispered through the next generation. Outside the base, Darnell Brooks had begun speaking at community events and veteran support programs. He often mentioned her by name, telling audiences about a sergeant who had seen past rules to see him as a person, not a problem. Families thanked him for giving them hope, and he always responded with a quiet, unwavering truth. "I didn't do it alone. Someone cared enough to act when it mattered most." In this way, Lena's courage spread beyond the base, beyond the uniform, leaving an imprint on lives she would never directly meet. On the base, the initiative grew. Soldiers began leading sessions, mentoring new recruits, and reporting concerns without fear. Commanders who had once doubted her leadership now sought her advice. Even officers skeptical at first came to respect her judgment and clarity. Lena realized that true leadership didn't always come from rank or medals. It came from standing up when no one else would, from speaking for the unheard, and from acting with integrity, even when the cost was personal. She had learned that lesson the hard way, with a gun pressed to her head and a life hanging in the balance. One evening, she walked alone to the hollow, where the first unsanctioned meetings had begun. The air was calm, the desert vast and still. She sat on a rock, looking up at the stars, thinking about all that had happened. Her thoughts drifted to Darnell, to the soldiers she had met, to the officers who had doubted her. She thought about courage, responsibility, and the quiet power of empathy. And she knew, deep down, that the legacy she left was not about headlines or recognition. It was about lives changed, about hope restored, and about a system that could, slowly but surely, learn to care. The next morning, she received a commendation from Central Command, officially recognizing her actions in saving Private Brooks, her advocacy for mental health, and her initiative to improve soldier welfare. The award was important, yes, but it wasn't what mattered most. What mattered was seeing soldiers come together, speaking honestly, supporting each other. That was her victory. At the ceremony, she looked out at the assembled soldiers. Faces bright with pride, eyes filled with hope, they whispered thanks quietly, almost reverently. And for Lena Marshall, that was enough. Weeks later, Darnell returned to Camp Redding for a visit. He walked through the base with quiet awe, observing the new programs, the soldier-led sessions, the sense of community she had fostered. He approached Lena as she stepped out of the office, smiling. "Ma'am," he said softly, "you changed everything here. And because of that, I've been able to change too." Lena shook her head, smiling. "You changed yourself. I just reminded you that you could." He nodded, understanding the depth of her words. They walked in silence for a while, watching soldiers gather, train, laugh, and support one another. "Do you think it will last?" he asked finally. She smiled faintly. "It has to, because lives depend on it. And the moment soldiers stop caring, that's when we fail. But I believe they won't stop." Darnell smiled, hope evident in his eyes. As the sun set over the desert horizon, Lena reflected on the journey that had begun with a gun pressed to her head, a choice made in the heat of crisis, and a decision to act with courage and empathy. What started as one moment of bravery had grown into a movement. A story of heroism not defined by medals or rank, but by humanity. The ripple effect would continue, in lives saved, in policies changed, in soldiers learning that compassion is as vital as strategy. And somewhere in the desert night, a sergeant named Lena Marshall knew she had done more than just survive. She had made a difference. A real, lasting, profound difference. And for her, that was enough.